My name's Christine Cordy, and I'm the project manager with the city. So the city did receive a Caltrans Sustainable Planning Grant for us to prepare the citywide feasibility study and implementation plan. So we are excited to embark on this project and work with us on the city. So we are very early in this project. Our consultant Kittleson will be giving an overview of the process, but right now we are, as Katie mentioned, here to provide information on roundabouts, information on the plan. We're only in the very early stages and haven't really conducted an analysis and have any locations specifically where we're discussing roundabouts. We will have future community meetings where we will get that level of feedback. So as I mentioned, the city did receive this grant. We are the grant recipient. My name's Christine. I'm the project manager. We also have our principal engineer, Edgar Medina, who's at City Hall, and a senior transportation planner, Drew Hart, who's part of our project team. So the city did contract with Kittleson and Associates, who is an expert in roundabouts, who's helping us prepare this plan. And we have their project manager, Mike Alston, who will be providing some information. The principal in charge, Wade Scarborough, is also here to weigh in on the question and answer period. And they have a project manager, Matt, who's also working on the plan as well. So with that, I will turn it back to Katie, who will be working on the first poll.
Great. So before we get started with the presentation, we have two very quick questions. We're going to ask one at a time. So I'm going to launch the first question. It's going to come up onto your screen now. And we want to know what you do here in Rancho Cordova. What brings you here? Are you a resident? Do you work here? Are you here for recreation? Maybe visit with friends, leisure? If it's something else, feel free to put it in the chat. All right. Looks like we have a few residents, some people who work here as well. I'm going to leave this up just for about 10 more seconds. All right. And just to share the results with you all, you can see we have some residents, we have some people who work here, as well as some people who are here for recreation. So that's great too. All right, so I'm going to launch the second poll now. So this poll is, we just want to kind of start this meeting by finding your general thoughts or attitudes about roundabouts. Are they very positive? They slightly positive, and again, it goes down to, we don't want to say the negative, but hopefully we're sitting on the positive side here tonight. But again, we're going to have a lot of time here to go through some of the educational components of roundabouts, as well as a great question and answer session to be able to clarify some of these questions. All right, I'm going to leave this up for just another couple of seconds. All right, so as you can see, we have some positive feelings about roundabouts in the room. So that's really great to see. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Mike Alston.
Thanks, Katie. Quick sound check. Can you hear me well? Okay, good. So I'm going to be talking about some project objectives, and then we'll talk about a little bit of roundabout education as well. And so as Christine mentioned, we're very early in this project, and the objectives of this project are a few different things. So one is to develop a roundabout priority plan for the city. So what does that mean? That means a couple of different things. One, it means actually identifying locations in general where roundabouts could be beneficial, and we'll talk about some of those benefits later tonight. And then actually getting specific and doing some feasibility testing, understanding the traffic volumes, understanding how people move through some intersections, and come up with some designs. And then more forward-looking as well would be actually helping the city develop criteria for future projects where we can't pick the whole city, we can't do the whole city, but we can understand where future projects, where roundabouts might be suitable and beneficial as well. Throughout the project, we want to involve you, members of the public and key stakeholders, to understand what concerns are. We at Kittleson Associates have a good technical understanding, but the local knowledge is really important to understand. Hey, these are the key things for the community as you're thinking about roundabouts and as you're thinking about safety projects. And then towards the end, we'll develop, like I mentioned, guidelines to help the city understand in the future where suitable locations for roundabouts might be, some of the design guidance. And a lot of that is going to be driven by what we hear from you all and from key stakeholders throughout the process as well. So that's what this project is all about, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Okay, so now I have about 10 or 12 slides on a little bit about what is a roundabout. So I saw early on that we had some overall pretty positive impressions of roundabouts, but I'm hoping that this can give you a little bit more about, hey, why is the city doing this roundabout project in the first place? What's the deal with roundabouts? So first things first, what is a roundabout and what isn't a roundabout? Well, so first of all, it's a few key features. They're round, but not all round intersections are roundabouts. So the key things to notice on this slide here are yield signs and yield control on entry. So if you approach a roundabout, you have to yield and give way to the drivers and the other road users in the circle. And you operate in a counterclockwise direction, at least in the United States, it's counterclockwise. So the idea is you approach an intersection, you yield and you look to the left and you understand, do I have a gap in traffic to proceed or not? And in an urban or suburban environment, they'll have sidewalks, crosswalks as shown here. They can be single lane or they can have multiple lanes. They can have multiple lanes on just one approach, that sort of thing. So just overall, the real takeaway here is when we talk about roundabouts, we're talking about yield control on entry. And then there's some key design features we'll talk about on the next few slides as well. So next slide. It's going to be a couple relatively local examples. And as I mentioned before, they can be single or multiple lanes. So the one on the left here is single lane. The one on the right is a multiple lane. And that's also a three-leg intersection, just to kind of show you that they can be in all manner of different locations. That's really just to kind of familiarize yourself. Maybe you've been through these before. So the next slide. So I mentioned before that, why build roundabouts? Why do this? What are the benefits? Why did the city apply for a grant? Why did they get a grant to study roundabouts? And what are the reasons that there's over 7,000 of these now and growing in the United States? Well, first things first, they're a well-documented safety treatment. We have a few slides on that later in this presentation to document just how beneficial they are from a safety perspective, what the crash reduction stats are. They also very often have less delay compared to other intersections. So almost always, compared to a stop sign, a roundabout is going to have less delay as you're driving or biking through it, especially throughout the day, especially in those off-peak periods when you can get there. If no one's there, you can proceed right through. And that compares to signals as well. So throughout the 24 hours of a day, you often have huge delay reduction benefits at a roundabout too. It keeps people moving. And then also the safety benefits as well. And so then the next thing is some environmental benefits with that. So emissions and fuel savings come along with that delay reduction. There's some access management benefits between allowing U-turns, between being able to design it to consolidate movements at and through an intersection. The other thing with a roundabout is there's no signal, there's no traffic signal hardware, so there's no electricity to run out to the site. So they're resilient in that way and can save you operations and maintenance costs in the long term. And lastly, they give an opportunity for aesthetic benefits. So you have this wonderful space right in the middle. You can do landscaping, you can put art there. Some cities have even, like Bend, Oregon has a city art tour where you can go around looking at roundabouts. There's other opportunities there as well. Next slide. So I have a couple slides on the safety performance. So roundabouts have kind of a staggering safety record. They're often installed where there used to be a stop sign. In some cases, they've been installed in place of signals. And there's been, just about maybe over a decade of research in the United States comparing roundabouts to other intersection types and showing really staggering crash reduction. So let's go through these a little bit. So up to 90 or 100% reduction in fatalities, a 75% reduction in injuries, 35% reduction in total crashes, and very little reported pedestrian and bicycle crash experience. Fact is, there really simply aren't, compared to other intersection types, there aren't as many roundabouts, and there aren't many at all pedestrian and bicyclist crashes to analyze. Can you back to that slide? I want to talk about a couple more things here. And so why is that? What's going on with this massive fatality and injury reduction? So on the bottom of this slide, we're showing essentially a typical perpendicular intersection on the left and a roundabout on the right. And I want you to imagine traveling through an intersection, and anywhere where paths overlap or conflict, we'll call a conflict point. And there's 32 of those locations in that intersection on the left. If you think about traveling through, especially taking a left turn, it's when your path overlaps with another path, it's a conflict point. You travel through an intersection, if you're traveling at the speed limit, 35, 40, 45 miles an hour in some cases, those conflict points, if they happen at a right angle, if they happen at a high speed, that's when you really have really severe and negative outcomes. You look on the right there, essentially what the roundabout does is it consolidates those conflict points. So instead of 32 places, there's 8. And it actually designs the geometry of them so that you're traveling at a lower speed. There's no opportunity to turn left and get hit. So it reduces the number and the severity of those conflict points. So that's really, the 35% reduction in crashes, much bigger reduction in those injuries and fatalities. And then the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about safety, and it's really all about speed. So again, here, if you follow this blue line from left to right on the slide, just think about traveling through an intersection. Again, as we mentioned on the last slide, maybe 25, 30, 35, 40 miles an hour, a typical intersection. At a roundabout, you're actually deflected, so you really have to slow down. And that's one of the key design features of roundabout, is controlling those speeds, keeping those speeds low. So why are low speeds beneficial? Well, one, they increase your reaction time. They require less time to stop. And then if and when people do crash, there's just simply less energy associated at lower speeds. So there's less likelihood of a really bad outcome. You probably walk away from it. Really, it's all about that speed. That's a bit about safety. I mentioned before aesthetic opportunities. Just wanted to share a couple of examples that we have, some really nice pictures of art on the left, some lovely landscaping on the right. That's just a big, nice opportunity at the center of a roundabout there. So now I want to talk about some common questions that come up and a few things related to people who aren't driving. So in terms of pedestrians at a roundabout, the common question is, what do I do? How do I cross as a pedestrian at a roundabout? So I want to talk about a few things, a couple definite benefits and a couple considerations. And we can talk more about these in the Q&A later as well if people have questions. So one is, I feel like a broken record already, but the slow vehicle speed. So, we know through research that the likelihood that someone's going to yield to a pedestrian is really related to speed. If I'm driving slow, I have an opportunity to see a pedestrian. I have the ability to stop, and it doesn't take me long to do so. We keep those speeds slow at a roundabout. That promotes yielding and allows people to find opportunities to cross. The next thing is this two-stage crossing. So what does that mean? Well, if you look at the very top there where we have a little leader that says median refuge, it essentially means you cross one direction and then you get to stop and then you cross the next direction. So you're never out there in traffic, crossing multiple directions, multiple lanes at the same time. So that's what the two-stage crossing means. So it really reduces your exposure and your vulnerability. A couple things to just in terms of considerations, you might have seen these or you might have noticed them in these slides. The crosswalk location. So one of the key design features of roundabout is you kind of pull that crosswalk off the corner a little bit. That gives drivers the ability to see you as a pedestrian and stop, separate from entering or exiting the roundabout. The flip side of that is it's not at the corner, so it's a little bit out of the way. But it gives people space to stop and yield to you. And then the crossings are yield controlled. So it's a thing that we hear often is there's no red light. So you can kind of think about it as like a right turn at a signal, but that's right turn that's controlled through slow speeds. So there's a couple of things to notice about pedestrians. And then on the next slide, I want to share a few more things about pedestrians. And this is actually based on some national research that was really looking into how to make crosswalks for pedestrians at roundabouts accessible to people with disabilities, especially low vision or blindness. So some key things to look for here, and these are really best practices and principles, which include having well-defined walkway edges so that you can know where the crossing is and find it, including with the use of a cane, having separated walkways, and then having detectable warnings. So you can see those, the little yellow tactile domes, having perpendicular crossings, and having contrasting crosswalk markings. So the key here is, in addition to those things we talked about on the last slide, is really best practice design principles to make sure that roundabouts are accessible to all pedestrians. And then on the right here, I mentioned this a couple of times already, there's some multi-lane roundabouts too, and a treatment that's very common there is to have a push button that either gives a warning or some sort of traffic control that actually stops traffic. That's for the multi-lane roundabouts. Okay, so we'll talk about bicycles now. So another frequent question is, what do I do if I'm on a bike at a roundabout? And so there's what has happened historically, and then I'll share where the transportation industry is going. So first of all, here I am again talking about slow speeds. So one thing to note is the speeds that we already talked about are typically compatible with the person riding a bike. So right off the bat, if I'm riding a bike through a roundabout, I kind of have two options. One, I can take this purple option here and take the lane and proceed through. There's no bike lanes at a roundabout. You would just take the lane and proceed through. Or I have the option with that blue path there to essentially take a ramp, which is provided off the road. And then there'll typically be like a wider multi-use path to allow you to essentially exit traffic on a bike. You don't need to dismount necessarily. You can follow that path as long as it's wide enough. It's multi-use, and you can make those crossings in a perpendicular fashion, and then you can ramp back onto the road. So that's what you may see at a lot of roundabouts that have been constructed. And again, I mentioned there's no bike lanes. You wouldn't see a bike lane in the circle. And then here we say guidance for off-street paths emerging. So I'll show a little bit on the next slide here. And this is, in the past several years, some design guidance that has come out through a couple state agencies and has trickled its way across the United States. As separated bike lanes have become more common and a more used design treatment, the question comes up of how can we get a separated bike lane through a roundabout? And so on the left here, we're showing how that can look. So you can see a separated bike lane coming through, and then I'm actually separated from pedestrians, so each has their own path. And then similarly, there's essentially perpendicular adjacent crossings on a bike. Again, no need to dismount. On the right here is just an example that's recently constructed down in San Luis Obispo. Again, separated paths through the intersection. And all those principles that I talked about earlier, keeping it backed off from the circle so that people have the ability to stop and yield, operate at those slow speeds, apply here as well. And then another question that frequently comes up is, what about larger vehicles, whether it's trucks? So if we were thinking about roundabouts, either near a commercial use where big trucks make deliveries or on truck routes, how can we accommodate them? And then also for emergency vehicles as well. So a couple things, really, just like with any other intersection, trucks and larger vehicles need a little more space. And so you basically look at a location and you say, what are the vehicles that typically use this intersection, and design for those? And so you can actually see in this picture on the left, like a fire truck is a design vehicle, it's a common design vehicle. Say, okay, fire truck needs to be able to make it through without hitting any curbs, anything. And that's easy enough to design for. Up on the top right corner is if you have a location that has a big truck, maybe comes through, once a day, once a week, once a month, you can actually provide a couple design features. This is called a truck apron. So you can see the rear tires of that truck are actually tracking over. So the driver actually doesn't drive the front wheels over the apron, but he drives through the circle, and then his or her rear wheels will track over the apron. So again, the key message here is, as long as we know and plan for the right context and the right vehicles, a roundabout can serve those vehicles well. And that concludes the introductory educational portion. And so now I think I'll turn it back over to Katie.
Great. Again, thank you so much, Mike. I know we had a bunch of people who have joined since we started. We asked a question at the beginning to ask about how people felt about roundabouts. And so we want to ask another question right now to see, again, if any of the feelings have changed after Mike's presentation. And again, I encourage you to put any questions into the chat box. We'll again have plenty of time at the end here to have a question and answer session. Wonderful. I'm going to just leave this up for about another 10 seconds. It looks like mostly everyone has responded. And it looks great. So either we have some people who have been unchanged by it, but a lot of people have been. So that is fantastic. And with that, I'm going to turn the program right back over to Mike, who's going to talk a little bit more about the city's project of this feasibility study.
That's right, me again. So have a just to kind of give you a little bit more detail about what the heck are we going to be doing for the rest of the study. So this is a slide that you'll see now and then again later, and it's essentially showing 4 major phases of the project. So the first portion is to actually take a lot of existing, so it's screen locations. So what does that mean? Take existing conditions data and help the city understand where could roundabouts be beneficial and where are they feasible. So what do I mean by existing conditions data? Number one is crash history. As I mentioned in the previous slides, given the roundabout safety benefits that we know through the national research, right off the bat, a good place for roundabouts might be places where there have been a lot of crashes relative to other places in the city. Other possible prioritization variables include looking at the different modes, so looking at where bus lines are, looking at where bike routes are, looking at where truck routes are to understand, hey, if it's on a truck route, it might need to be a little bit bigger. Doesn't mean we can't do it, but it just changes the considerations. So we've been collecting a lot of data from the city to understand, and that includes traffic volumes too, to understand, hey, how big, how many lanes do we need? To help understand at a citywide basis, where could we explore this treatment for safety benefits, for delay reduction, for some of the things I talked about already. So that's the first step, is let's just screen the entire city. We're looking at all the roads the city owns, all the major roads the city owns, all those intersections, and say, hey, what's possible here and what would be beneficial? Once we do that, we're wrapping that up towards the end of 2022 here. It actually comes to saying, okay, based on that, here's some really top locations that we think are feasible. So then we'll actually test them. So when I say test them, what I mean is look at the traffic volumes, look at what's on the adjacent corners, look at what truck movements there are, look at what crash history there's been, understand that. After that, and actually throughout, we'll gather input and develop designs to actually say, oh, we've gone from every intersection of the city to now a handful. And then we'll prepare the city guidelines that are more forward-looking as well. And I'll actually talk about that a little bit more detail on the next slide. Let's go to the next slide here. So I mentioned the screening locations and I mentioned data. So one thing that we're actually looking at here is, and what this map is showing, the map's showing a lot. And what it's showing is 2 different data sources laid on top of each other. So one is for every intersection in the city, what's the crash history? So essentially the dark red circles are where the most severe crashes have happened. The flip side of that is those are really great opportunities for Roundabout to help improve safety going forward. Underlaid under that, there's another yellow, green, yellow, and red layer. And that's essentially showing environmental burden. And so that's using some environmental data from the state of California that says, hey, what is the environmental burden? What's the pollution burden? And that's just another data layer input that we might use to help prioritize locations in the city. This is what I mean when I say using a lot of data to help understand what's feasible and what might be the priorities for the city. Next slide is, I mentioned this earlier, is okay, once we know, hey, here's the realm of possible intersections where we could do a roundabout, is actually testing it. And this is really going from like a very coarse level to then a more detailed level. So on the left here, actually really just showing like basic sizes of, hey, we know in general a roundabout needs to be about this big. So let's just drop that circle into an aerial and just see, is it going to hit a building? If it's going to hit a building, it's not feasible, right? Or is there space available? So we can really work from on the left here, where we start with dropping the circle down. We say, okay, how big might this be? To then working on the right to say, okay, let's actually sketch this in keeping with the best design practices and principles. And this is the same location here on the left and right. So we started with the test location on the left. We said, oh, there's no buildings. And in this example, the city owned the parcels on each corner, so they were interested in pursuing it. So you can imagine a similar exercise here in Rancho Cordova to say, we've got 10, 15, 20 intersections. Let's actually sketch it out and see what it looks like. That's what I mean by test top locations. From there, if that all works and we test the feasibility, we'll get those locations where roundabouts look promising, look like they'd fit, and actually develop designs in keeping with input from the community. So there's a lot of different ways intersections can look. Things I mentioned already, like the size, like how do you design for people riding bikes? If there's a bike lane, that's something that we would vet with the city and with you all. We'd come bring these ideas and concepts to you, have a couple different alternatives, and come up with the best option. Then once we do that, then we document it. And so at the end, we would prepare city roundabout guidelines. So what happens at the end here is we take lessons learned from the project. We take the data work that we did to understand, hey, what does seem to work for the city for roundabouts? And then one thing I would really strongly emphasize, and thanks for showing up tonight, is comments and concerns that come up throughout the project can make their way into the guidelines. Hey, we heard from the community, they really are concerned about this type of location, or they really want to prioritize this type of location. That's the kind of thing we can write up in the guidelines so that for the next several years after the project is over, city continues to prioritize those things for roundabouts. And then we'll go back to the project overview. So again, just to wrap up here, we look citywide, every intersection the city owns, every major intersection. We ask the question, is it feasible and what's the priority? Then we actually develop a couple locations to test, go back out to the community and say, let's compare these designs and let's get your input and feedback. Advance those designs to where they'll be ready for the city to go get more funding, or advance those after the project. And then we document, say, here's what we did, and here's best practices and guidelines for the city moving forward. So that's kind of an overview of the project. And now I think Katie's gonna take over control again.
Great. So basically what we are looking to do now is we're going to be leading into the question and answer session. And so to start with that, we wanted to ask the first of our poll questions that I'm going to put up onto the screen now, that if you had to choose one priority, the top priority for the city to emphasize off of what Mike had just talked about, what would it be? Would it be the maximum safety benefit, social equity, location emphasis, bike route locations, or others? Please feel free to put it into the chat. And again, you might have more than one of these be your top priority, but we're just looking for the top for right now. Great. All right, just going to leave this up for just another couple of seconds. I appreciate, it looks like we've gotten almost everyone's response. And not shocking, 88% of the room was really focused in on safety. So that's fantastic to hear. The second question is kind of a repeat question that we had asked a couple of times, but again, just want to see if the information tonight has changed your thoughts on roundabouts at all. Again, some of you all came in with a good favorable opinion, so sometimes not changing that favorable opinion is good. All right. And it looks like we have a lot of people who have their opinions have been unchanged, but we had a lot of favorable opinions coming in. So that's really great. So with that, we're going to go into our question and answer session. So we have 7 project team members on our call here tonight that are eager to answer your questions. I'm going to look, I don't see anyone in the chat box, but I see that Jason has his hand raised. So we can absolutely or Joseph, my apologies. Joseph, I'm going to ask to unmute you and you can kick off our question and answer session.
Excellent. Can you guys hear me all right?
We can, thank you.
Okay. One question I had around your data gathering methodologies. Have you considered adding in police and specifically Rancho Cordova police ticketing information, specifically around failure to yield? One thing that I would really, I'm very concerned about in Rancho Cordova is reducing the amount of citizen police interaction for traffic violations. And roundabouts have the ability to say, control traffic a lot better than stop signs, especially where in areas where stop signs are frequently ran.
Great question. Is Mike or Christine?
Sure, I can offer up and then I'll let the city add on anything I might have missed. So that's a great idea. I appreciate the input. One thing that we are definitely including is crash history, and I showed that map. So that gets added in an indirect way. We haven't gone to anything as granular as failure to yield citations in particular, but I think that's a great idea and we'll discuss it and carry it forward.
Great. All right. And again, we have plenty of time here. We're going to sit in this question and answer session for a little bit. So again, if there's any suggestions on locations or how to prioritize some of your input, maybe feedback on overall about the study and why the city is taking it. Again, this is a great time for us to answer any questions that you might have. And I will sit here in awkward silence for a second. All right, we have another raised hand. I think Alani, if I'm pronouncing that right, I've asked you to unmute.
It's Eleni, yeah.
Eleni, hello, thank you.
Hi. I guess I don't have a car, so I get around town by bike or on foot. So my concern with roundabouts would be of the type where you're supposed to take a lane on a bicycle. I just know around here, like even roads that have sharrows, I've been harassed close to the bike trail. So are there like, how does that cultural element generally get tackled if that ends up being the design? Like, is there outreach, or how do we help people understand what the actual traffic laws are?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I'll again offer up a couple insights, and I think I really appreciate that. As I was mentioning, it's something where, as we're going through the project and we think about what goes into the guidelines, information like that is helpful to hear. So in general, you're right. There's a lot of locations where you might take the lane through the circle, but then it's really a question of, we look at the city's active transportation plan, we understand if it's a location where a bike lane is appropriate on the approach roadways, then it may be the case that it's appropriate to provide a separated bike lane through the roundabout to keep you off the roadway. If it's a location where speeds are managed pretty well and pretty slow and people are comfortable taking the lane, then that might be appropriate at the roundabout. So I think it's really a question of the context of each location. But again, it's really helpful to hear that feedback as we're trying to plan, okay, what are the spatial needs? What are the right locations to do it? That's a key piece, is what kind of bike facilities should the city provide at these locations?
And then just to add on that, the city does have a bike master plan, and that is something that Kittleson does have. And as they screen the different locations, they will be evaluating what is a current, bike facility, what's a future bike facility, and then testing kind of the appropriate template to see if it's, the right fit. I don't know, Drew, you want to add something else from your transportation planning eye?
Yeah, hi, thanks. The only thing that I'll add to both of those comments that were great, and Eleni, thank you for bringing this up and asking the question, because we want to make sure that we're planning transportation investments for people like you that move around the city in that way. But all I was going to say is when we do start rolling out roundabouts at some future date in the city in the future, there will be some education campaigns that go with it. Now, we don't reach everyone, so I can't say that all interactions with drivers will be with educated drivers on how to use a roundabout, but there will be an education component to whenever we do start implementing the results of this effort tonight.
Wonderful. And it looks like the chat box is starting to get busy, which is great. I do see that we have a hand raised, but I'm going to go through a couple of the questions in the chat box first. So it looks like we have some people discussing about some possible locations. So that's fantastic and things that we can definitely take with us. Ones like Coloma Road, possibly Zinfandel Road are the streets that Belinda feels a little bit less safe on. Also, Joseph thinks selfishly that Olson and Cali del Sol Way need something. He doesn't know if roundabout's the right answer, but definitely needs some type of, most likely, some safety improvements there. Chris just had a car crash into a house in their neighborhood, and after it ran a stop sign. They would love to see one in the intersection of Reuter and Rockingham. Folks run that stop sign all the time. And then Tim was thinking maybe one going in on Sunrise near one of the new development entrances to slow down some of that traffic. And so again, that is really, really great feedback that we'll definitely take back with us. We have a couple other questions. First one coming from Tim. He's assuming that if a test plot on a desired location goes over onto private property, the city has to make an offer to buy that property, correct? I think this is a right of way kind of question from the city, maybe.
I guess I'll say that as we start to evaluate data and prioritize, we might prioritize locations, we'll look at the right-of-way constraints. As Mike mentioned, is there a building there or some type of fixed utility that is going to be expensive to acquire or move? Or is it maybe just like you said, a sliver of a front yard that we can maybe go through the right-of-way acquisition process? So I don't know, Mike, if you want to add on the screening kind of criteria.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I mean, in general, I think I showed that, it starts with the circle and goes to a sketch, and that the idea is without spending too much effort to understand, okay, are we impacting right away? If so, it's either really not feasible or it's a conversation we would have before we get down the line on something like that.
Great. All right, we have another question from Joseph. Will the data be provided to the public regarding the crash data? Specifically, Rancho Cordova residents have a lot of hotspot areas that need improvement, but it's hard to suggest locations without seeing some of that data. It's a great question, Joseph. Mike or Christine?
Yeah, I think the intent is to share our work with the public as we move along. And I know the city also has a recently finished, I think, was it last year or was it this year, local roadway safety plan as well. Drew, maybe you can say a word about that.
Yeah, that's a good point, is that we do have a local road safety plan that was adopted by city council. So it might be, I wish I could point to the location of that study on the website right now. I don't know if we've put it on the website just yet, but it is in the works. It was adopted earlier this year at the very tail end of last year by our city council. And that captures all of the crash history from the past 5 years. And it has specific locations broken down by vehicle crash type and whatever the police report says as the priority or the primary reason. So if you're interested in crash data, we can certainly point you to that. So if it's not on our website, if you can't find it with a quick Google search, feel free to reach out to one of us on the project team and we can get that in your hands.
Wonderful. All right, so that's all of the questions right now in the chat box. We're going to leave it open for a few more questions in case anybody has any more, or if anyone wants to raise their hand and interact with the project team, feel free to do that as well. You can find that in the reactions. In the toolbar of the Zoom, you can raise your hand from there. Belinda asks, can you prioritize intersections without streetlights? The intersections at Armand and Chastela get many stop sign runs a day near the school. It's a great comment.
I will say, the data we includes traffic signals, so like a stoplight. We haven't used street lighting data, but that's something that we can assess as we identify locations. So Belinda, I'm not sure if you meant traffic signal, which we do have citywide, or the street lighting, which we didn't collect for this project. But it's a good comment. Either way, really.
Okay, Belinda mentions street lighting, or clarifies that she's talking about street lighting, and we do have that that data available to us, so we can do a run of that. It's not one of the planned criteria, but that's a great point, and we can work that into our evaluation.
Great. I am going to put our project website right in the chat now so that you can stay up to date with the project and kind of future engagement opportunities. But again, going to leave this chat up for next couple of minutes in case there's any more questions. We do have a bit more time left on the call. So in case anyone has any other questions or input, should be a great time to have it. All right. Again, we'll keep the chat open, but with that, oh, Tim, Rancho Cordova Parkway would also be a good area to look. Yeah, the cars certainly do race down that street a lot. And again, all of this is great. This is great data for us to be able to take back with. But I'm going to turn it over to Christine to talk about some of the next steps of the project.
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and thanks, Mike, and everybody for being here. And thank you to all the community members who came and asked some really good information. So as we mentioned, we will be gathering a lot of this data to identify top locations and to perform those test fits to develop some concept locations. And then the future plan is to obviously document that into an ultimate guideline for the city. However, we will be having future community workshops as we gather this data, so we can start to present that data to the community, and we can start to get some input on the prioritization and where we're going to put some of these locations. So we are working with Kittleson to prepare the next those next tasks, and we will be looking to have a future community workshop in early 2023. And as Katie mentioned, we do have a website, and this website is our current project site, which does have the Roundabout project on it. Also wanted to leave you with my email and phone number if there's any other project questions that we can answer for the community. And then Katie, I'll turn it back to you in case there's any final comments we want to kind of address before we wrap up.
We do. We have two last kind of comments, questions for feedback and consideration. So the first one is Alani's curious on why the city isn't starting with these types of road designs. As Tim mentioned, the Rancho Cordova Parkway, is the trends now for traffic engineering towards calming? If so, why are the new roads and new parts of the city being designed like highways? It's a great question.
I can take the first part of that. So one of the elements of this plan is that we're going to put together future guidelines. So how we evaluate roundabouts in development and in the infill projects, so that as these new projects come forth, that we can look at that during the conditioning for the project and incorporate that into the planning. So that is an element that this plan will address, is not just how we test fit them and use them in different older parts of the community, but also how we implement them in newer parts of the community and as part of our a tool in our planning toolbox. So Mike or Drew, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think that Eleni brings up, it was Eleni, right? Yes, that she brings up a good question about just the trend of traffic design that we are leaning toward more traffic calming mechanisms, and that without getting into the weeds of transportation nerd world. I'll just say briefly that before we were always as planners and engineers kind of designing streets to get as many cars through as possible. And that's just kind of been a historic trend for a long time. And now the shift is getting more to traffic calming, especially in neighborhood settings. So you will start to see some of the newer developments start to incorporate roundabouts. Our public works director can't wait for this effort, the study that we're embarking on right now, to be done, because he's having conversations with developers currently for developments that are, in the works right now, and he wants to know where he can start asking for roundabouts. And we're saying we haven't done our due diligence yet to really kind of put together this evaluation. So it can't happen soon enough, in our opinion. So we're really excited about this work, and I think it will start to influence the developments that you see in the newer parts of the city. But like Christine said, we don't want to just focus on the newer parts of the city. We also want to look at where the roundabouts will be appropriate treatments and design elements in all parts of the city.
Wonderful. And Jacob just left a comment for feedback for consideration that I thought was great. So I want to read that. He thinks only single lane roundabout should be used. Multi-lane streets should be reduced prior to the crosswalks. Please design streets physically, narrowing lane widths to reduce speeds approaching roundabouts to 15 miles per hour or less, without relying on ineffective speed limit signs. Separate bike lanes would be great. I love a separated bike lane, that's for sure. But yeah, that's a great comment. Again, we're going to stay on this call here for the next few minutes in case anybody has any other questions or comments. But again, I want to echo Christine on saying thank you so much for joining us tonight for this meeting. As she said, we're going to have another community meeting in early 2023, so this won't be the last time you hear from us. Feel free to, again, visit the project website, making sure that you sign up for information from the city with their emails of their kind of project updates that are coming as well. And again, we'll have this recording and a meeting summary up onto the website within about a week or two. So anyone who has missed this call, anyone that you want to share, anyone who's nervous about roundabouts, who needs a little education, feel free to send them this PowerPoint or the video as well. But again, really appreciate everyone coming out here and spending their time with us this evening. And again, we're just going to leave this open in case anyone has anything else to say, but we'll be here. Yeah, so we're going to have it, I believe, Christine, we're going to post it on the project website, correct?
Correct. Katie put the link in the RanchoCordova.org.
I'm putting it in again.
Yeah. So this is where we'll kind of keep a living document as we progress in the plan, as we have more of these meetings. You'll see this presentation, you'll see the video. As we have future deliverables, we'll make sure to keep that website kind of like a living document for this project.
Absolutely. And again, your feedback is always welcome. So feel free to reach out to Christine or my team at any time if you have any questions, or if again you leave this meeting and think of something later, feel free to access and talk to us at any time. Thank you all again.